The days when a few nations set the agenda and expected others to fall in line are over. As the United Nations itself symbolizes, finding common ground is an imperative.
India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar mentioned it has been a long-standing trend that a handful of countries form an agenda and then they expect the rest of the world to get in line with it. Western nations that are developed in the global order expect to set a sort of a hegemony, and poor developing nations are expected to just deal with it. The question is, could that be changing now? India is one country that has had to battle terrorism and extremism for years. Sadly, encouraging that disturbance are our own neighbors, Pakistan and China. India has often spoken repeatedly at the international forums, reminding the world of the horrors perpetrated on them. And now with the world order changing, so is India's tone, and it is turning more assertive. India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar spoke recently at the United Nations General Assembly about issues concerning India and the Global South's position in the world affairs. Jaishankar spoke about how the world is witnessing a period of chaos and turmoil. It's the post-COVID world, highlighting shortcomings of the global order. Importantly, how selective some nations have become in their decisions to politics of convenience.
That political convenience determines responses to terrorism, extremism, and violence. Similarly, respect for territorial integrity and non-interference in internal affairs cannot be exercises in cherry-picking.
India states repeatedly at the United Nations about zero-tolerance policy toward terrorism, and there should not be any justification of extremism that aims to terrorize people. In 2022, when Jaishankar spoke about the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1267, it designates terrorists, and that some members who politicize for their own gain to defend these terrorists are not doing anybody any favor. These actions do not advocate world interest and actually negatively impact that country's reputation too. The reference, of course, was to both Pakistan and China, but also to the nations that want action to be avoided against Pakistan, and that was a reference to the Western nations. Amid all of this, the role of the Western nations and China also, which are accused of influencing the decisions of the United Nations and then impose it on the rest of the world. How is India's relationship with the United Nations? India is party to 13 sectoral conventions on terrorism adopted by the UN with the objective of providing a comprehensive legal framework to combat terrorism. India has taken the initiative to pilot a draft comprehensive convention on the international terrorism. It's called CCIT. It happened in 1996. India supports the counter-terrorism mechanisms established by the UN Security Council, resolutions that are imposed and sanctions that have finally come. And often India has pushed for it also. That's against Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIL, associated entities such as the Lashkar-e-Toiba or the Jaish-e-Mohammed. But remember who supported Pakistan for sheltering these terror groups? It was China. Repeated blocking resolutions to stop India for getting terrorists designated as one. In September 2022, S. Jaishankar, without taking any names, targeted China for blocking India's bid to blacklist and have sanctioned several terrorists based specifically in Pakistan. On China, that constantly initiates provocation on border with India, S. Jaishankar said in August 2023, China is the only country among 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council which is opposing India's entry into the highest body of United Nations. This despite the fact that India is the 5th largest economy.
History is on our side. I can tell you. UN will change. The people, the countries, the people, the forces who are blocking it will keep trying. But eventually it will happen.
The United Nations, which was founded with the noble objective of fostering international cooperation and peace, but now it appears there is a complex web of politics, power dynamics, and a brief sprinkle of global interest. At the heart of this complex system lies the undeniable influence of the Western nations. The post-World War II world was dominated mostly by 2 power blocs, US and USSR. After the USSR was disbanded in 1991, United States became the sole major power of the world. One might even call it the main big leader of this wide world. In 1965, US was sending Marines to the Dominican Republic as an attempt to protect American property and lives in the Dominican. Accusation was if US intention was to stop communist leaders really from seizing power. UN intervention was expected but never came. Michael Wander Schulenberg writes in IPS why the West needs the United Nations. West got lost in expensive and unwinnable military interventions, often with questionable justifications too. Most were illegal by international law and in their wake left the United Nations Charter unhinged. They did not advance the cause of democracy clearly. Worse, there was a lot of chaos and widespread human rights alleged abuses too, undermining the values of the United Nations. Remember, Security Council has 5 permanent members: United States, France, Russia, United Kingdom and China, collectively known as the P5. Any of them can veto a resolution, and they have used it to ensure their country's aggression does not face a sanction and does not get noticed. Even far back in history, during the 1956 Suez Crisis, United Nations' first peacekeeping force had to be set up because the Security Council was unable to agree, and that for a way forward due to the vetoes by France and the United Kingdom at the time. In February 2023, UN General Assembly called for ending the war in Ukraine and demanded Russia's immediate withdrawal from the country. It was in line with the UN Charter. But should United Nations, many are asking, not have applied the same principle to Western interventions in Iraq, Libya and even Ukraine? UN's Resolution 1483 is alleged to have tried to even legitimize US-UK-led invasion of Iraq on the claim that the Saddam regime possessed weapons of mass destruction. In 2022, when Russia vetoed a resolution against it, its ambassador added, and I quote him here, "Such openly hostile actions on the part of the West are a refusal to engage and cooperate within the Council." Let's try and give you some historical background. Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia ruled the country with the policy of ultra-Maoism, carrying out genocides between the period of 1975 to 79, killing almost 2 million people. Accusations against the United Nations was that it recognized Khmer Rouge regime and ignored the human rights violations. In 2011, Syria's dictator Bashar al-Assad cracked down violently on peaceful protests. As soon as the protests turned into an uprising, the regime released the Al-Qaeda fighters, terrorists from prisons, which eventually formed much of the leadership of the Daesh. UNSC here made attempts to address the conflict, but this time Russia had the veto power that has been accused of protecting its ally, the Assad regime. United Nations peacekeeping force is seen with respect too, but it does have a history of also not doing enough when was needed. Romeo Dallaire was tasked to lead the United Nations peacekeeping missions to Rwanda. He saw an imminent genocide that was coming up and placed repeated requests to send reinforcements of the troops. But the United Nations delayed this decision. While the killing started, rather than send more troops, United States joined a chorus of countries calling for the withdrawal of the troops that were already deployed. The concern to them was that Hutus earlier had killed 10 UN peacekeeping officials to stop international intervention. But the fact is, if more troops had been sent just in time by the United Nations, the leading general also said many people could have been saved in Rwanda. As I conclude, Western nations hold a dominant position in the Security Council. That power often decides the direction of the resolution. Cultural and media dominance of the Western countries can also overshadow the perspectives of less powerful nations. We are global citizens today in a changing order of the world. Should other nations also not get a chance then to be able to participate in decisions as the West does, and now even Russia and China, considering India's economy is also constantly increasing? India reiterates its stand against border aggression repeatedly at the United Nations in hope that the Western nations will pay heed to it. To ensure United Nations remains a beacon of hope and fairness in our interconnected world, other nations and specifically India will have to be given a better and a bigger position at the deciding table. Thank you for watching. So it remains to be seen how India's future at the United Nations deciding table will be. Stay tuned, coming up next with Jessica Goyal. What's happening in India today?
Thank you, Pooja. Well, we all know Jaishankar for his fiery speeches, but our Indian women diplomats are no less. Don't take my word for it. Listen into how Patel Gehlot hit back at Pakistan at the United Nations.
Jammu and Kashmir neither is a so-called integral part of India, nor is it India's internal matter.
We reiterate that the Union territories of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh are an integral part of India. Matters pertaining to the UTs of J&K and Ladakh are purely internal to India. Pakistan has no locus standi to comment on our domestic matters. As a country with one of the world's worst human rights records, particularly when it comes to minority and women's rights, Pakistan would do well to put its own house in order before venturing to point a finger at the world's largest democracy.
In 2021, Sneha Dubey made headlines for delivering a fiery speech in response to Pakistan.
We keep hearing that Pakistan is a victim of terrorism. This is the country which is an arsonist disguising itself as a firefighter. Pakistan nurtures terrorists in their backyard in the hope that they will only harm their neighbors. Our region, in fact, the entire world, has suffered because of their policies.
Then there's Vidisha Maitra, who slammed Pakistan for defending Bin Laden.
Can Pakistan confirm the fact that it is home to 130 UN-designated terrorists and 25 terrorist entities listed by the UN as of today? Will Pakistan acknowledge that it is the only government in the world that provides pension to an individual listed by the UN? And finally, would Prime Minister Khan deny to the city of New York that he was an open defender of Osama bin Laden?
In September 2017, Paulami Tripathi garnered attention when she gave a befitting reply to former Pakistan UN representative who spread fake news by showing a Gaza woman as victim of pellet gun injury in Kashmir. Watch how India responded.
In view of this cynical and misleading attempt by Pakistan, we are constrained to show this assembly a photograph that reflects the real picture of pain inflicted by the nefarious designs of Pakistan on India. This is a real and not a fake picture of Lieutenant Umar Fayyaz, a young officer from the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir. Umar Fayyaz was kidnapped at a wedding celebration. He was brutally tortured and killed by Pakistan-supported terrorists in May 2017.
Well, these are just a few names amongst many others who've made waves for their reply to Pakistan at the United Nations. That's all that we have for you today. Thank you for watching.
For more informative videos like this, keep watching India Today News Mo.